There we go.
I see all sorts of people. Hello.
Let's see how much power I have.
Limitless power.
Do any of the attendees, I think you can answer in the chat. Do any of the attendees want to do an experiment, a Zoom experiment with me? So I can see if I know how to do this. Okay, Nick, raise your hand. I'm just seeing if I can, okay, so this is the deal here. Oh, it's working. Welcome everybody.
You have far too much power.
That's how I like it, yeah. Okay, yeah, anyway, welcome everybody. I'm Kat, I guess I'm your host today. In this session, we're going to be doing some live mapping, and it really is live, as in we're starting 100% from scratch, okay? Great. Don't see anyone freak out. All the sessions today are structured as a Zoom webinar. So if you want to participate, if you want to be on video, like we just made Nick go on video, if you want to be able to talk anytime, you have to tell me so that I can promote you so that you can participate, okay? And I have no idea what the limits are for Zoom. So maybe at some point it'll just be like a fishbowl where someone has to tag out if another person tags in. Okay, yes. And I will try to narrate the best I can to make sure that the session is inclusive for people who can't see the screen share. I'll also share links so that if you're using a screen reader, you can use the screen reader to navigate around. That being said, I will be using the screen share, so we'll figure it out together. Also, to introduce myself, I'm Kat, like I already said. I'm a white lady. I'm wearing a purple shirt. I have brown hair. I have glasses that I don't normally wear, but I have a migraine, so that's why I'm wearing them. I am, so for those of you who don't know, that's a visual description to make the session a little bit more inclusive for anyone who can't see me. So that's how I like to start. I am a director of engineering at Newbank. I run the foundational technology organization, and I will pass it to Andy.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Andy Nordgren, and I work for Unity Technologies. I lead the product management team for our central technology organization, so shared technology platforms for e-commerce and web, and also engineering tooling. So that's what I do day to day. Mapping has been part of my practice as a leader in technology for years at this point, a hugely powerful tool. And then in my, I guess, spare time and other life, I've also been an activist in different contexts. For example, around relationships. I'm a originator or co-originator of the relationship anarchy concept. So all kinds of angles to mapping out problem spaces and thinking about agency for people, both in some hardcore technology scenarios and in other phases of life.
Ben,
Oh, hey. My name is Ben. I run learnworthymapping.com. I like helping people map, and encouraging people to map and to do it wrong and to do it as best they can to learn things. I'm writing with my co-author a thing called a pip deck for something that we're building called Strategy Tactics, my co-author David Hall, and I'm really grateful to be here. And I guess I should pass it on to the next person. Kat, should I just go with the rest of the panelists here, starting with Nick, who was here
let's do
next?
it.
Yeah, I'm Nick. I wasn't expecting to speak. I just put my hand up. I am currently the CTO at a company called Feeder in London. Not sure what else to say, really. Okay, next one. Finish.
Hello, everyone. I am Manish. I am from India, and I'm a mapper since 4+ years. Love all the events, especially Map Camp, and all the diverse set of topics that everyone bring in. Kat and Andy and Ben. Very excited to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so just a reminder, if at any time, and I'll probably say this 8 million times because people will join and leave and join and leave. At any time, if you would like to be promoted to panelist to join us here in the hot seat, please raise your hand. And if you don't want to be a panelist, also please raise your hand and I'll put you back as an attendee if I have the power to do that. We'll figure it out together. Yes, I do have the power to do that. Okay. So we're going to be doing some live mapping. As I said earlier, we're going to figure some stuff out together. The topic of this is online radicalization, how people are being radicalized online, which seems to be a thing these days. Not a thing I particularly enjoy, but it does seem to be a thing. So the idea here is that we're going to do some mapping and we are going to identify some potential either interventions. So what could we, the people here, do in order to make even some small amount of difference? For those of you who don't know me, that's my big thing. I like for each of us to take the power that we have and do what we can do. The other thing that would be interesting to get out of this exercise is to sensitize ourselves to shifts in the landscape. So which things should we be paying attention to and which things is it okay to pay less attention to? Does that make sense to anyone? At least several people. Terrific. Okay. All right. So I made a Miro board. Everyone, whether you're a panelist or not, I think you should be able to join and, okay, let's see.
Just thinking about what you
Does
said.
that Miro link work? That's for some people. It's popping up.
Yay.
Some guy made this template. It's Ben.
Huh? I see everybody in here. This is awesome.
Yes. So, good people. Has anyone used this Miro board template before? It's like a built-in. Oops, I forgot to lock it. Ah. It is a built-in template in Miro, right? Then everyone
Yeah, Miro
can
added
just
it to
select
their,
this.
Template library, yes. You just search for Wardley map.
Yes. So you can all, there you go. You already got one thing out of this session. This is the thing that exists. And I have found that it's a good place to start. For those of you who have not mapped with me before, I like to use the Visual Studio Code plugin to do most of my mapping. That's what I prefer, but this is a great collaborative tool in Miro, and especially a good place for brainstorming. It's also really easy to like just copy this template a million times. And again, another thing about me, if you haven't mapped with me before, I like to not make one map, but like 8 bazillion maps. And if one goes in a direction that seems like something I don't want, I throw it away and move on. Yeah. Okay. The first thing that I like to do when I make a map is something that's actually not on this template, but I'll do this. I like to put the date on it, because at the end, I usually also put an expiration date, same as you would find on like a gallon of milk, so that people don't use the map or attempt to use the map after it has outlived its purpose. The other thing, if there's not like a date, I would put some sort of trigger, like, oh, if this happens in budget season, throw this map away. Or if this company goes bankrupt, throw this map away, or something like that. Great, then. Then making some creative edits already to the map. Yes, what's the first thing? Again, I'll repeat. Yes, you can hide everyone else. Let's see. I remember. I'll share my screen so you can see me do this. But there's this little blue icon to the left of everyone's faces and everything. And you can click that and say hide collaborators cursors. Or you can turn it back on. So let me know if you have any trouble with that. Cool. All right. A lot of new people have joined, so I'm just going to reiterate what I said before. If you would like to be promoted to panelist and chat with us, then please raise your hand or post in the chat, and I will promote you to panelist so that you can participate. No one's doing it, so I guess they're fine with just watching us. I feel like I'm in a fishbowl right now. Okay. All right.
So on this subject then, are we talking about how radicalization happens, or are we talking about how to prevent it? And then you've got things like the UK Prevent training, or what's the angle on this one? Sort of just where to start?
Yes, the angle is how to prevent it, but my idea is that in order to understand how to prevent it, we might need to understand why it occurs.
Yeah, I always like diving into what is already happening in order to better understand just like what's even going on, what are the parts, what are the moving things, and like I think then you can have a conversation about where to intervene in that system. It just gets a lot easier when you've just kind of explored the mess a little bit and sat with it.
Okay.
So with that, I'd like to make a suggestion. Ben, you can yell at me. Andy already knows. You can definitely yell at me. But I propose that we start with actually box number 4 on the template and talk about the needs that are being met in this case.
No objections over here. And I
No objections, really?
I think we could even also ask folks who are just watching, if you have ideas about, as we go along, where we're adding sticky notes and things like that, if we miss something, just type it in chat and we'll keep an eye on it and add things on your behalf. If you don't want to add them yourself.
But so if we start talking about user needs here, a good friend of mine is a fandom researcher, like media and fandom, and has done a lot, their PhD on this. And they are actually now joining a research project in based on some university in Australia. I'll have to look it up where it is, but where they are going to apply knowledge about online fandoms to exactly the problem of online radicalization. And I think that's very interesting context in this type of discussion. And for me, it points to belonging as one of the key kind of user needs in this space, that is something that in the past may have been satisfied in other contexts closer to people, and now is satisfied in new ways. And for me, it seems to be a big primary human driver when we're talking about these things, and that these powers are so strong that people can even start to ignore their own family and friends because they've found a new, more powerful belonging in these online communities. And I think there are shades here where you might be a Harry Potter, fan, or you might be a conspiracy fan, and that these things look very, very similar. And I think it's because they're united by these kind of powers of belonging that you can find.
Yeah, and I think and some of the people have put it up already, a sense of purpose and so a sense of identity that it brings, that belonging gives them their sense of identity, which maybe they may have missed in their past before they got it, which you, again, to your point, you used to get things through church, football, etc., that you now get through online radicalization.
Someone put choice. Does anyone want to expand on that? If no,
Yeah, I have. I think people are rarely making the choice they want to make. And it's not just about, political aspects of it. It's also commercial, like e-commerce. We think we have a choice, but we don't know that Amazon is selling something that it wants to sell us. That's kind of radicalization. Even I feel that they would know what we will buy and they would dictate what we should buy. Does it make sense? I mean,
I think it makes sense. Let me repeat that. Okay, make sure that I got it. So it sounds like there's two elements behind choice here. People like to feel like they are making a choice, and there are organizations that like to decide what the choices are, what you're choosing between. Yes?
yes.
Okay. That gets to the other thing. I don't know if we want to dive into this now or at some point, but I have a strong suspicion that we're going to end up with another set of needs on here, or maybe in another map. But what are the needs of the organizations or places, digital places, or whatever, that are being fulfilled by radicalization? Like if this wasn't meeting a need for whatever, Twitter, I'll throw Twitter directly under the bus, then it probably wouldn't occur, right? Like,
for example, they would step down, come out more heavily against it if it wasn't fulfilling a need for the organization. I can see that. I can see that there's lots of, I can see that Twitter liking the fact that they've got these lots of different groups that are constantly at war, radicalized to shout at each other and to tweet against each other. That probably brings people onto their platform to help them monetize it.
Yeah, it also makes me think of one Jones, Alex, who may recently have been in the news for many interesting reasons, terrifying reasons. Fundraising came to mind for that.
Yes. And there's other, well, good examples of that, including, yeah, certain other rather famous people. I don't want to make this political, so yeah. But there are lots and lots of different examples out there of that particular case.
just a note here. I find it very difficult to believe that this session will not touch on some political topics.
Okay.
So that is going to happen, okay? And we just need to be respectful of each other and also understand that, like, we are not here doing some sort of political debate, right? We're here to do some live mapping together. So let's also not assume that everything people say here in order to fill out the map is like what they believe and what they're campaigning for on the weekend or something, right? Like, we're trying to build empathy with people that we definitely would not, right? Like, I'm not a Twitter executive. That's completely outside the scope of my reality, but I might like say some things to try to gain empathy with that position so that I can understand, right? That for me, this is very important about wordly mapping, right? That we can move out of the space of why would someone do that? Because they're an idiot, right? To understand we are living in a system that disposes us towards certain actions and outcomes, and people are generally not doing things because they're idiots, but because they have certain motives, certain needs, certain whatever, and they're also existing in a system that has its own inertia, right? So we're trying to sensitize ourselves.
Yes. Okay. So I'll give an example of where radicalization has been used in the UK to potentially, and this is a view, to get something across the line. Brexit. They radicalized people against immigration. A lot of it was done online using Facebook and other things and there's examples of Welsh valleys where there was there's TED Talk on it, and it's been covered by The Guardian a lot, where effectively they managed to get everybody in the village to start, or the town, to be starting to saying, actually, we are very much we're all against immigration. Then you actually go look at the town and you find they've got one immigrant. But they're seeing this as the major thing. They've been radicalized against it, therefore they voted for Brexit. And that's a need. So there's political needs. There's very strong political needs, a very strong ideology that is using radicalization to get their message across. Whether you agree or not with Brexit, it's what seemed to have happened. And I think there's other ones that political ideology and radicalization around that is a massive thing. And it's probably, in my personal opinion, it's bigger than we believe it is, in all directions, not just to the right, not to the left.
Makes me think about control and reinforcing power structures or creating new ones. Yeah.
And helping to destroy existing power structures as well. So it's the full cycle, really, depending on what side of the equation you're on.
Yeah, Chris makes an interesting point in the chat. He says, seems like there are co-radicalizations where radicalization on an opposing side is useful to increase unity on your own side.
Yes. I can see that.
FOMO.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a good one.
That is a
Yes.
good one. Yeah. FOMO. Javier asks an interesting question, and it's one that I almost always struggle with. And I've come up with a very opinionated answer, but it's not always the right answer. And it's, is there a limit to how many needs you should identify for one single map? Kat, I'm curious how you think about this.
Yeah, I guess if I start to feel like, oh, I don't know what is happening, then that would be my prompt. So these are user needs. That would be my prompt to go to the users and think about who the users are. And then like, I don't know. Usually that helps me figure out what the heck I'm doing with my life, is to match these needs up to users, because we've already identified here that we have multiple users, right? Group with needs. So there's the actual platform themselves where this radicalization takes place. There are the radicalized, and there are the radicalizing. So I think that means, so we basically have like a marketplace and then buyers and sellers of a sort.
I
You
missed
can
the
feel
first.
free to disagree with me at any point.
So I heard the ones who are radicalizing people, the ones who are radicalized. And what was the first one that you mentioned?
The actual platform where the radicalization takes place.
Would you generally do 3 different maps for that though? Or would that be one? Would you try to get them all on one map? Because I find that when I
Yes.
try to have multiple contexts or multiple users on the same map, it becomes a complete mess very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Agree with everything you said. However, sometimes for me, I find it very difficult actually to disentangle it and have just one user on the map. So for example, I used to work for Live Nation, right? And they have like an ecosystem and a marketplace. You can buy tickets, right? What does that require? Well, it requires that there be content, there be live events. So that requires artists or people who create content. It requires that you have an audience, people that are buying the content, basically. It also requires that you have venues, right? And like this is the actual, so there's a digital place where you would be buying the tickets, and there's a physical place where the thing would actually be going down. And in that sort of marketplace, it could be very difficult. I drew many maps while I was there, and a lot of times it was really difficult to like disentangle those users. Often it was very necessary to put multiple needs on the map. But yes, I absolutely agree that the more is there, the messier it is. When I'm first digging in on a topic though, I try not to edit myself too much. Like I said, like I put a bunch of stuff out there and then throw it all in the trash and just pick a couple of things that I liked and yeah, throw that in there.
Yeah, I like staying with the mess and sitting with it. And one of the practical things, like if you just want to get a map done, like I always like tend to tell people to be just start with one thing, do a small thing. But it's really hard to get started because you don't know which thing to do. And so while it might be like pragmatic to start with one user, one need, and make a map based on that, if you really want to like set yourself up for success in the process of exploring the mess, I think you kind of have to have a mess to explore, and getting all the needs out, getting all the potential users out, and what are all the moving parts and so on is a really great way to like almost make a menu for yourself to choose from in the future when you want to go deep on a particular thing. It's like, oh, this part really seems to hurt. Like I can save the others for later. But yeah, you could perhaps ought to explore as many as you can.
Yeah. Something I found in my last place when I was looking at maps was that you end up within a two-sided marketplace. Actually, you end up with one user at the top and the other user at the bottom. So the user, the consumer of products, and the actual producer at the bottom, actually you turn the map around sometimes depending on who you're talking to. So there can be ways to, that's another example, I think, of where I've seen it, a slightly different approach. Whether anybody else uses that is another question, but yeah. Okay, so we know who I think people have added the public as well, which I think is actually another user as well that we haven't talked about, which I think is quite useful to have. And law enforcement is another user. I think they're fairly good as well. Actually, they're very important to this discussion.
I think in the States, the FBI has made some interesting assertions about, in the United States, domestic radicalization, I think. If I'm remembering correctly, I'd have to find some citations to get in on that, but yeah.
Yeah, fun fact. So we have been discussing this model of surveillance capitalism, right? I think Manish, you were the first one to bring that up, which is basically where your behavioral data is harvested and recycled into a model that will be used back on you in order to change the way that you act and feel. And the origin of that business model, I think most people would agree, and Shoshana Zuboff, who wrote the book about it, would also say the same thing, goes back to the Patriot Act in the United States. And so the idea was we need to increase surveillance. We, law enforcement, and intelligence agencies, which whatever, right? I think most people would lump them up with law enforcement. They need to be able to surveil people in order to prevent terrorism, because there was this idea that terrorism was in danger of becoming a condition, just a fact of life, as opposed to this problem, right? So remember that there had been the first World Trade Center bombing, there had been the Oklahoma City bombing, and then there was 9/11, all in relatively short succession. And so the Patriot Act was passed, and it said, we will have loads of surveillance, but we don't actually have a way to create those technical mechanisms for conducting that surveillance. So we're going to partner with our buds in the Bay Area, in Silicon Valley, and we're going to give them some money through our CIA VC thing that we have, and they will develop something awesome to help us do this surveillance. And they were like, yeah, right? Silicon Valley was like, yeah, let's do this. Right on. And started to invest in the mechanisms that we now have for surveillance capitalism. And then we developed a bunch of other tools that increase the velocity of data, so things can be closer to real time, and it's relatively easy to know what is happening in real time and to create interventions in real time on these platforms. And then we end up with the choice thing that Manish brought up earlier, right? Which is where now each of us is having this highly personalized experience online. Awesome, sounds great, right? except that we're all having this highly personalized experience online. And so we're not being exposed to the same breadth of things, and we don't have overlapping experiences. So that fabric that we were alluding to earlier, right? That people are lacking that sense of belonging in some places and going to find very strong sense of belonging. Maybe the overlap at night. How many of you are each watching your own Netflix program instead of watching television together with the other people in your household? Ben, I'm just imagining Ben, his spouse, and their cats each watching a different.
Yes, that's right. Actually, that's correct. Bird TV for the cats. Some swashbuckling over here, and then trying to watch some stand up or something.
We just this mapping session is over because Richard points out that we had just invented Petflix. So now let's forget about improving the surveillance capitalism situation. Let's find out how we can apply the same model to pets. All right.
Pet surveillance.
Are pet being radicalized too?
We could start, Manish, that's what I'm saying. We could be the ones to radicalize pets. It's not been done.
It's an untapped market.
Why? Just why do we want to do that? Why would we
No.
want to? Come on,
Nick,
let's start
wrong
with the why.
question.
Why would we want to?
Why not? I mean,
Because it's just wrong. Come on, you're gonna get donkeys running into crowded things, radicalized and doing things that you just don't want to think about.
move fast and
Seriously.
break things, Nick. Move fast, break things.
But
You know,
break humanity, break animals. Do you really think that's the right thing to do?
hasn't stopped us up till now.
Okay, there is that. I mean, look
I'm
at
going
where
to
humanity.
demote
I agree.
Nick.
Sorry.
Nick's not going to be a panelist anymore. Getting demoted back to attendee.
Fine. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
He's thought about the
Yes.
future. That's not allowed over here.
Sorry, I apologize. I will look back and take us back to the 1970s, like certain countries are aiming at the moment. Okay.
I saw a couple
So-
of chats just now come through for hosts and panelists. Reminder that if you want everyone to see your chats, you have to change it to everyone. Otherwise, it'll be just the hosts and panelists. But if you do only I don't know what kind of social engineering you're doing, sure, if you want to send it to just us, that's also fine. And then another reminder, because we're kind of at a point here where I think we're going to start connecting users and needs. So it's kind of a nice pause point. If you would like to be promoted to panelist, raise your hand. Also, there's no expectation that you stay here for 3 hours, right? So feel free to leave to other sessions, come back whenever you want, or you leave and a friend comes. I don't care. We're literally just winging it here. So follow your heart.
I fully intend to eat some pizza somewhere in that period as well. So take care of the human stuff too.
Ugh, humans. Okay.
Just shudder.
Yes. So I think that's all I'll pause. I'll redo that announcement several times. And for the people that have just joined, we're currently trying to do a map with the intent of looking at the system that produces radicalization online. And we're wondering, is there any way that we could intervene here? Each one of us take the power that we have in the system and intervene in any way? Or are there things that we need to be attuned to, that we need to be listening for, so that we can understand how the system is shifting and towards which outcome it is disposed? Okay, cool. All right, so my other panelists, where you think we should go from here? Connect the users and the needs, draw a few out?
Yeah, I think just there's been a couple more added as well, hasn't there, since the users, politicians, which I completely agree with. They are massive radicalizers, and the radicalized intimate circle. I think that's a good one as well, because they have a very different relationship with the radicalized than the general public would. So I think they're really good ones to add into the into the user section. But should we start with one user to start with and then take it from there? And work out the needs
I would like
from
to
one
match
of them,
up
or...
I would like to pull out a couple and go through that process of matching up the needs a couple times. And I don't think we're going to pull all of these needs. So I'm fine with us just saying, here's the user and one need that we're curious about. But also I'm fine with people telling me they want to do something different.
This is one of those.
think-
Manish, go ahead.
I think we should pick radicalizer, because when we understand what they need and we attack there, maybe we can attack radicalization. That's my thought, but you can pick anyone.
I like it. I mean, it takes me, I was briefly mentioned the prevent training that the UK government set up for everyone to go through. It's really great. It tells you how to become a radicalizer. Not necessarily what they expected out of the training, but that's what I walked away from it. And I think actually understanding that actually does allow you to understand actually how to look at the opposite side of the coin. So I agree. I think that's a good way to start.
Can you tell us, Nick, I know you put the link in the chat, but could you tell us a little bit about that training?
So prevent training is something that the UK government's come up with. It's about trying to spot radicalization in schools, is where it started. So looking at the things you could look out for, teachers and other people could look out for, to say these are the things that could be about radicalization. So, and trying to break the norms. So it's not necessarily trying to make you think about it's not just a particular race or religious background. Actually, anyone could be radicalized in any way, and giving examples so that to try and improve the sensitivity of teachers and other people who react in a school environment. For example, myself as a governor, you have to go in, you have to be aware of these things, and so therefore you make sure everyone goes through and understands, everyone who comes into contact with the children understands all of these different methods of radicalization and what to look out for. And then with safeguarding, etc., which is obviously child safety, etc., you end up with a system that actually ideally catches these things before they become a problem. So it's a worthwhile thing, even though I do take the mickey out of it about the fact it did feel like I now know how to radicalize people.
That's what I thought the first time I read Origins of Totalitarianism by Anna Arendt. I'm like, oh, this reads dangerously like an instruction manual. And then I watched it play out in real time right in front of my eyes. So that was rad.
Yeah, but it's not just me. I mean, other people who've been through it as well turn around and say, yes, now I know how to radicalize people. But it's not just me, unfortunately.
Perfect. Do we want to match up a need for each of these radicalizer? I put politicians in that group. A need for the radicalizer that we would like to match up there.
I think they really need distraction. They thrive on it. So a radicalizer who wants to radicalize other people, they use distraction to their advantage.
Okay, yeah, we can roll with that.
Yeah, it's always interesting. Like, there's a very real thing happening over here, and a radicalizer does what in that context? They distract you. No, look over here. There's a little bit of consequences of Brexit come to mind as an example. It's like, oh, there's something else. Millennials tell you not to use the like button or the like emoji or something like that. It's like, it starts an outrage cycle.
Yeah, they don't want you to see the truth.
What would
or at
Yeah, go
least
ahead, Minnie.
see the things objectively. Yeah. So,
Oh my gosh, I feel like you're trying to bait me into a discussion of what objectivity is. I'm not taking the bait, Minnie. I'm not taking the bait. Okay. How about for the platform where the radicalization takes place? Is there a good need for them?
yes, definitely.
What is the need?
It's control.
Why do they need control?
You are asking of platform. They need platform to do it at scale. Otherwise,
Yes.
they wouldn't do
Yeah.
it. I mean, they would take time and more resources.
Okay.
And you also get that. So, I mean, again, platforms provide that social contact as well, don't they? Without the platforms, it makes it harder. I guess its scale is more. You're right, actually.
But let's see, we can do.
What about a channel to drive action?
Is oh, I'm struggling here not to jump in. Is inaction a type of action?
Is an action and a type of action?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess.
Makes me think of Eckhoff's errors of commission versus omission. It's like you did a thing you weren't supposed to do, or you didn't do a thing you were supposed to do. Both are bad, potentially.
Yes. I think, yeah, not always driving towards action. Sometimes it's driving towards inaction, right? Like, oh, don't in the this is a thing, right? And how policy is made, where sometimes you want to show so many of a thing, right? Where people perceive it to be a condition instead of a problem to be solved, right? So, you know, when you see in a news cycle where suddenly the news is flooded with, oh my gosh, why are all of these things happening? You can ask the question like, are all of these things happening at a different rate than they once were? Or is someone just trying to make me, is it useful for someone to have me believe that this is a chronic condition rather than a problem worth solving, right? So some people say that this is happening in the climate space right now, where you're being just like all the time with all of these stories. So you're just kind of like, this is just a thing that is happening. It's not conspicuous anymore. I don't need to engage it as a problem. So sometimes the thing that is desired is inaction. Do not intervene here. So that's why I get stuck on the word action. I don't know if that makes any sense. That's why I get stuck there. Adrian brought up a great point in the chat. We didn't put money anywhere on here. So I don't know if that's because people think the reason you want money is so that you have these other things. But for me, money is pretty motivating. Like, yeah, I might acknowledge that Zuckerberg seems to have some weird ideas about being the dictator of the digital world, like creating the governance mechanisms for the digital world going forward. And maybe that's not totally money, but I would say money would be a big motivator. It's a business model. Surveillance capitalism is a business model. And I feel like we should pop that on there, cash money dollars.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And I think the other and the sort of the other one, the radicalizers that use the platforms for recruitment. I don't know how we drive that out, whether that's it's not really a need of the platform, is it? Or is it?
it's almost convenient though. Like when I think about the clickbait articles that I see,
Yeah.
there's a radicalizer, there's a person being radicalized. The platform is a harmless intermediary that doesn't want to have any, like, be seen as having any sort of moderation control over that. But they're benefiting because if I click, it keeps me on their platform, at least for a period of time. It's engagement with those accounts. It gives everyone the good chemicals when they get likes, and like it's just a lot of dynamics there that the platforms benefit from indirectly.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's sort of what you were pointing at there.
Yeah, neutral. Being neutral is what they would sell the platform.
Yeah, they're not.
But can actually anyone ever be neutral in
No.
reality? Everyone has opinions, and that comes out of. So yeah.
Yeah.
This is cat bingo right here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And exaggeration. I think FOMO is part of subset of exaggeration. So I'm not sure. It comes
Yes,
under
I don't
half.
know. I don't know what exists in the rest of the world, but in the United States, we have part of like our big communication flaw is basically it says that the platforms don't have responsibility for the content that is there, and there's a big ongoing debate. So a lot of how this issue is framed in the United States is on the right. We have people who say this is a First Amendment issue. Everyone should be allowed to say whatever they want to say, and platforms shouldn't censor people. I guess that equates platforms to the government, but that's a whole different issue. So on the right, framed in terms of First Amendment, freedom of speech, and on the left, yes, there is this idea of decency in communications, and that we need to make platforms responsible for harmful communication, indecent communication. Yes.
Okay. So platforms, what if they're not neutral? What if something like GB News or Fox News, for example, or something even more extreme comes along? Actually, they're a platform for people to have a view. I would say they are a platform. They're not necessarily always going to be neutral, and actually they could be the radicalizer as well as being the platform.
Yes, that is
And
absolutely a
unregulated.
thing that occurs.
Unregulated. Government doesn't know how to regulate it, and they would prefer those ones. Moderation is different, but regulation is another issue. For a country where regulations are, weaker, I mean, and that's a playing field.
I'm
Or
not sure
in
that's
a
even.
country, for example, where they funded the development of the underlying technology.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. That sort of it may be actually that the people in power are the ones that have actually enabled it, not caring, not regulating for it, but actually removing regulation to enable it because it serves their needs. Mention no Tory party.
Yes. So the lines I was just connecting in this part, I was just connecting the users with the needs that we were selecting. But there is this happening over here. Does anyone from this want to get promoted to panelist so we can talk through it?
Simon Wondercheck. Putting him on the spot. He
Okay.
didn't volunteer, as far as I know.
See. I'm fine with promoting people, and if they don't want to say anything, they can just not say anything. All right.
Hi, sorry about that.
Hello. Would you like to walk us through this?
Yes, it just started doodling and other people started joining in, so I'm not sure if it's really sensible, but yeah, sure. So yeah, I picked out, we picked out the radicalizer, and I started with a need that he wants to radicalize other people, which needs 3 parts from my point of view, one of which is the reach. No, I have to reach other people, otherwise I cannot radicalize them. I need effective messaging, and I think somebody else edited or no, pointing something like political agenda, commercial agenda, which leads me to the impression, okay, I need driver motivation for, well, the radicalization part. Yeah, and from there on, we kind of got it even further down. So on the reach part, we have social media and other messaging platform like Telegram. And I think here people discovered the issue that we have the interest of advertising income, so user engagement. And we all know some stories about Facebook, for example, where they don't tend to, well, govern their system in a way that it sometimes supplement these kind of radicalization. Sometimes they even do something different because people touch a specific topic and then they find, okay, this seems to be of interest of this person, so I push in more content in that direction. And this leads to radicalization, not doesn't have to be something really dramatic, but I think if you think about the political division in the US, I think it's to some degree at least driven by also the effects on social media, where you have this kind of filter bubbles. So this made sense to me as well. And on the right side, with the effective messaging, I feel like the most effective messaging is a half-truth. So something where it happens a negative event, or you have some statistics, maybe just correlations, but people tend to misuse that. And so it seems kind of legit. It's not a complete lie. It's nothing out of the air, thin air. It is a half-truth, and it's kind of hard to work against that. And I think one of the issues is that oftentimes we have a missing education, so people are not really well equipped to handle, let's say, even classical media reports to interpret them in a way. So that's the other area on the right side. Yeah, and again, it was just doodling around and people just started joining in. I didn't want to capture this whole process here. I'm sorry about that.
No. Again, I'll just say some things that I would normally do when I'm mapping, like not in kind of this weird conference setting, but normally. A common thing that I do is everyone doodle at the same time as we're talking about this. And then in 20 minutes, the timer is going to go off. This portion of our conversation will be done, and we'll all show each other our doodle maps and see where they are the same and where they are quite different, right? Because again, for me personally, what is maybe one of the biggest things that mapping has to offer is that we uncover assumptions that we all have. And so if we're looking, if everyone's drawing a different map, it makes it sometimes much easier to compare notes. Yes. So was anyone surprised by anything in this map?
No, I think the one addition that's been added by someone else that I've tried to join in, fear. I think as well as half-truths, you have driving it by fear. And that's, again, fear of the unknown, fear of change, fear of the different. And I think that is almost as powerful as half-truths, you can say. I think it's a different take on the same kind of thing, but I think it's a real one that you needed to be called out by whoever put it there. Brilliant.
Yeah, I hadn't considered. I was surprised by half-truths. I hadn't really fully considered that, but it makes complete sense. Like a nugget of truth that you can extrapolate on and build a whole universe of alternative potential things that may or may not actually be happening.
But I think it's super interesting to have the half-truth there, because I think a lot of interventions that people try is to go for those half-truths and basically try to prove that they are half-truths. But these interventions just do not work because there are other needs in the picture that are driving, like the reason that people want to believe in the half-truths. So basically trying to prove to people that they are false can have almost the opposite effect, because now you're shaming people, which is just likely to drive them further towards the part where they can find belonging, which
Yes.
is with other people who agree with them. And so I
Which
think
makes
that
it
for
more-
me would be an anti-pattern of attempting interventions in this landscape, because I think it's been pretty roundly proven that it just does not work.
Yeah, I think you're totally right, and it also takes up a lot of energy to try to disprove every half-truth out there. Maybe then fear is maybe the point of tackling it. However, you can address fear, but maybe that's more helpful than the half-truth.
Yeah, and I
Well-
added someone on the left wing side here. It's like, okay, you need someone to radicalize, and I put here as a kind of dependency for that is that there then needs to be people who actually have a deficit in a stronger sense of belonging and purpose, because if you have stability and connection in your normal life, why would you need to seek out this type of belonging elsewhere? And so I think that deficit becomes a key, or that's where I would at least think of it like this when seeking out interventions, which I think is also similar to kind of change the cost benefit profile, like someone mentioned about cybercrime. Like, how do you reduce the attractiveness of this like criminal career? And probably one of the main angles to that is to have other things that are more attractive. But these are kind of orthogonal, right? I think for interventions in the landscape, it's easy to get pulled in and drown in prevention, when the most effective prevention might be to just create alternatives, like better alternatives.
It makes me think too, like, yeah, it's a yes and kind of proposition too.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, when I go to the doctors, right, and I say my shoulder hurts, and they touch me in these different places. Does it hurt here? Does it hurt here? Does it hurt here? And then they touch one spot, and it's like, that's the spot. That's kind of how I feel my way through like an in progress map, and it felt that way when you pointed out people who lack a strong sense of purpose or belonging, because like what does that depend on is like the question that comes next. And so kind of like tying together, I forget who Santeri was saying about the hacking thing that you were just referencing. It's like, yes, presenting alternatives, right? Like a more interesting thing to do than radicalize people, or an easier thing to do than radicalize people. But in like a cybersecurity frame, like increase the cost of radicalization, like make it harder to radicalize people. And I suspect there's something interesting in those question mark boxes that's been added like in there that could make it like reduce the supply of people ready to be open to these kinds of things.
I do just want to point out that it seems like we are jumping to interventions a little bit.
Oh no! Sorry, Kat.
Yes, I'm putting on my facilitator hat, and I also just want to keep making like the meta remarks. So someone in the chat said this isn't a map yet. Yep, that's absolutely right. And kind of a success metric for me is like, how few of these steps do I have to do before I get to something that will get me unstuck in whatever it is I'm tackling? So frequently I don't make it past step 3 or step 4 on this canvas or my adaptation to it in VS Code. Yes, you can get back to just being a spectator, Simon.
be gone.
I'm sorry, I don't know how to lead here, and I don't want to
Yeah,
be in the spotlight all
yeah, that's fine.
the whole session
Um,
over.
Yes, reminder, if anyone wants to be in the panel, you just have to raise your hand. I'll put you in the panel, or put something in the chat. I'll put you in the panel. Yes, so I guess a lot of the time, right, I'll only make it to users or needs and be like, oh, never mind, I'm unstuck. I don't need to make the whole map. You know, I guess like I wouldn't consider it a failure if we stopped right now, right? That's, yes.
I agree
Okay.
wholeheartedly.
Yeah,
Like-
I've run into a lot of people that are like, oh, well, I don't have time in my life for mapping right now. I'm like, what? You don't have time in your life for mapping? That's a weird thing to say. But then, come to find out it's because they're used to like the full day workshop and, where you do all of these things. And yeah, ain't nobody got time for that, right? Yes.
Yeah, treating
All
mapping
right.
as a habit, it involves playing with the smaller steps. If you make lists of users, you're mapping. Yeah.
Who knows? I don't really, again, like, I'm the worst. I will, yeah. But I'm putting on my philosophy hat and being like, doesn't matter if we're mapping or not. Like, no one's going to come and give you a gold star for mapping and high five you at your desk or something. So I'm not always sure if it matters. Welcome, Chris. What's
Hey,
up?
Chris.
Hey, it's been a long day.
Yeah.
I bet.
I just wanted to comment because I unfortunately I wasn't able to look at the entire session, but I've just opened it. There is someone to radicalize, and you get there are people who lack strong sense of purpose or belonging from other sources, and there is this question about social inclusion. But there is one more thing which I think could be quite useful to add, and this is around people who hold or who already hold mindsets which doesn't set those people for success in life. So if you happen to be a person who has, let's say, certain social skills or other skills or very difficult financial situation or stuff like that, and the society or the life just doesn't work for you, you can get quite easily angry and frustrated. And at that point in time, you may be very susceptible to any sort of explanation which will, clear things for you. One of the work of the Venkatesh written about is that if you are observing a lot of things and you don't know which of those are important and which are not important, what is signal and what is noise. If somebody offers you an explanation, you can immediately trash all the noise, focus on the important things, and you experience almost like emotional release. Tension goes away, right? And if tension goes away, then you are getting a very serious benefit from accepting somebody's points of view. So I'm not sure exactly where I'm going, but there is something about people who don't have sufficient social skill, I mean, who are in a difficult life situation, and they just happen to be very susceptible for models which provide them explanations. And if they get wrong models, then we get radicalization.
I like
Just
the
my
Okay.
two
way
cents.
Ben's put it actually in the chat. Moment of crisis or pain would be a big thing about one of the ones that are more susceptible to it. And the other things I put down as well: social economic situation, fixed mindset. I think are all sort of all things you've mentioned in what you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
I also put another question here for us to consider as we go through this exercise, but why do some people get radicalized and not others? Because in our users, we also had people that are not radicalized. And that's the majority of people, right? I hope so. It's scary to me that no one even nodded when I said that. So
I hope.
Well, I think actually, you could say that people are radicalized in the other, that you, just because you're a moderate, are you actually radicalized to the center? Are you actually, you're saying you're not radicalized, but actually you still have a different view. I don't believe I'm radicalized, but I believe inclusion. I believe in lots of good things that are in my view, but am I radicalized to that view of the world? So actually, am I radicalized? And actually, these other people over here are also radicalized, but it's my radicalization is sort of seen as more of the central radicalization. Sorry to be, I don't think there is. I probably, anyway.
But it's a funny point, because being a Swedish person, Swedish people, of course, think we are very normal, but it turns out that there are a couple of outlier values in Sweden that make us one of the most kind of radical cultures in the world in terms of deviating from global norms around consensus and a couple of other things that are actually quite extreme in Sweden compared to many other cultures. And if you've only lived inside Sweden, you tend to consider this as the norm and others as outliers, but it's actually the opposite. So these are for sure situations that can occur, and I think it's a great point.
So, and unique, and I really like the direction in which you are going, because it resonates very well with this concept that there are values which are explicit, but there are also implicit values which people don't consider part of themselves, or don't even recognize, but they can be very important in terms of selecting which viewpoints or models are you willing to accept. Because if there is a person with a very specific mind and values, for example, their personal identity, or has a very strong ego, that this person will not likely to accept a point of view which says that you should be doing something different in your life. The ego will just dismiss it. But when you have a different mindset and you can recognize that that might be actually your fault, then perhaps you can do something about it.
I think
Yes.
this is all going in the direction of building empathy, perhaps. So when I first saw this map, I'm like, or graph, not a map yet, you're all correct, but I thought, oh, this makes perfect sense, right? These things go together. Good deal. And again, I don't believe in like self-editing as you're doing the math, right? Get it from your head out somewhere else so that you can better reflect on it. So I'm a big fan of that. And I wouldn't want anyone to edit as they go through, but after you have this first iteration of a value chain done, something that I really like to do is go back through and ask myself if I am having empathy for that user and their needs, or if the terms that I've used to describe the components or whatever is in this value chain, do those terms contain value judgments, and are those terms close to what the user would be saying, right? Part of this, I'm trying to take on this user, use my own knowledge and try to build empathy for this user and looking at this value chain. So would a radicalizer, first of all, use the word radicalizer? We might question that, right? But again, like someone pointed out in the chat, that you can be like, yeah, I'm radicalizing for good, or you can be like, I'm radicalizing because I want to, right? So some people have a negative connotation of that word, some people don't, but we can move right along from that. Oh, someone else raised their hand. Okay. All right. Yes, so we can question that. One that really popped out to me is half truth. I'm not sure that I have ever heard someone say a half truth, like, oh yes, I'm a notorious peddler of half truth. come get your half truths here. So
Sure
wonder
do enjoy these
what-
half truths.
yeah. I wonder if there is a different word that we could use or phrase that we could use to describe whatever that idea is from the point of view of the radicalizer. Chris Ford says propaganda.
There's an idea from philosophy of science that actually scientific theories routinely do encounter anomalous data, and they don't explode. Like the paper that I linked, Clark Chin and William Brewer, 1994, suggested that there's only a few stylized responses to it doesn't fit. Like you can ignore the inconvenient fact, or you can reject it, or you can find a way to exclude it and sort of protect your mental model from, or maybe you hold the data in abeyance, or you reinterpret the data while keeping the model, like instrumental error. You know, it's not a discovery of something new, it's a smudge in the telescope or something. And like the way that theories accumulate these shells of protective explanations, it seems like the paper is about how scientists treat data. It's from their perspective, from the radicalizers, the radicalized people's perspective.
Yes, I think, yeah, this probably, I bet lots of people on this call know that I'm a notorious hater of Socrates, okay? Like, Socratic method, awesome. You know what they did to that guy? They killed him for being irritating. So that's how I feel about that. Like, so I think, yes, we have these models, and sometimes there are things that are anomalous, and you know, sometimes that doesn't cause us to throw out the model, and sometimes it shouldn't cause us to throw out the model because it might, I don't know, I guess I get nervous around the word truth, right? Because my whole philosophy in life is starting from the place of what would need to be true about the world in order for your experience to make sense. Yeah.
Simon just nailed it in the chat.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think if we just drop the word half, right, and just say
The real truth.
that would be that would be from the point of view of our users, that would be, and we can get into a huge debate also about, do people always believe the thing that they have in the messaging? I don't.
But do
know.
I mean, I get that there's one angle to map based on the point of view of the user that we're mapping from, but I would maybe challenge that that's what we have to do. I
It's
think
not what
that
we
when we're
have to
mapping,
do.
no, but I would say that I mean, we're looking at this from the outside, right? And we're trying to understand the tools and situations that are necessary for this to occur. I would think it's fine to name this a half-truth, because at least in our view of objective reality, these are half-truths that they're working with. And
Yes.
to understand the landscape, it must be possible to name things in the landscape that the user themselves wouldn't call out, because they haven't mapped the dependency chain, or they haven't thought about all the underlying factors. So surely we must be able to speak to concepts here that are not in the vocabulary or perspective of the user, the intended user.
I absolutely agree with that. I'm working the steps I would normally go through, right? So normally if I saw a bunch of words or phrases that were loaded with judgment, that would be a red flag for me, is that I'm going with the diverge converge pattern. So if there are already a lot of judgments in the initial version of the value chain, then that means we have already converged in some ways on a certain set of values or beliefs. And so I absolutely like that. By the time we're arriving at interventions, there will be value judgments baked in here, and we will be using a set of words that would be quite foreign to the user, but or even known to the user, but the user finds them very distasteful, because we are going to create something that makes certain things conspicuous that were obstructed or not so conspicuous before. But right now, I want us to diverge. I want the world to be as big as possible, and then we can go through the process of converging. And Simon, yes, sorry, I'll try to do that.
While you're bringing Simon in, one thing I'm noticing too is a sort of trick that I'd like to play sometimes is what belongs in this thing-shaped hole in the map. Like if I take half-truths out and I rip it out and there's just a blank there, and it's like, oh, effective messaging depends on something. Fear depends on something. It's like, what is that thing-shaped hole capable of making room for? And that starts to sort of open up the possibilities that there's more than just this one thing that we put in that spot. Anyway, Simon's here now.
Yeah, just maybe to give a story about what I meant by half-truth or maybe misleading information, or even especially the point of exploiting correlations. Friends of mine work for the police here in the western part of Germany, but they are mostly responsible for making surveys and answering requests from politicians and whatnot. So they're more on the science-orientated area. And they tell me for example, they get requests from the more radical right party here in Germany, the AfD, like something like, okay, please give us statistics about crimes that have been done in open, what are they called? Swimming pools, the swimming areas. I don't know what's the right term for that, but you know what I mean. It's a public pool, so to speak. And they want to have statistic about crimes happening in public pools, and especially what kind of ethnicity does this crime in the public pool. And because they know or hope that a lot of people have a non-German background who do the crimes here in the public pool areas. This might be even the case that you could say that statistically speaking, you have people from another ethnicity doing more crimes or involved into conflicts in these areas, but this completely neglects the social structure they are in. So it's not about they are originally that lets them tend to be more criminal. It's about what kind of uprising, or let's say what kind of activities do they normally do, or can have they access to, or what kind of social background they are currently living in. So, but they misuse this fact, and they try to make a correlation and put it out as a fact and say, see, we all these people from the other countries, they tend to be more criminal. We have to send them out of this country. Now, it's fueling their messaging, although it's based on, let's say, facts which are just misinterpreted or are represented misleadingly. And that's one of the points where I say that this is an effective messaging, because there's a statistic, even from the official police department. And no, you cannot say, oh, the statistic is wrong, but you have to explain lengthily about why this is not the right interpretation of this statistic. And then it gets back to what Andy was saying, that it's kind of pointless to try to argue against it, because people won't hear this message.
That sounds like an effective way to create inaction. It's pointless. It's impossible to understand. There's so much work. Feels very familiar there.
Well, I wouldn't say that it's not worth the effort, but I think in order to tackle the real issue, you have to look more on the left side, where we're stating people who lack strong sense of purpose or belonging from other sources. So I think a lot of things where we can see radicalization is, and if you just look at the messaging and the social media platform, they're all just symptoms. I mean, radicalization happens also before social media was existing. So it's nothing new. It's maybe more easier to spread the information here, but it's not the cause of the radicalization.
Okay, I think we hit on some important things there. It's like, are we intervening at the cause? Are we intervening, like what Andy was saying earlier, making it more or less difficult or attractive to do the thing, even if we have nothing to say in terms of the cause? Yes. So at this point, we have something huge happening here, right? We have this big graph type thing. So now, because it does seem like we're going a lot to intervention, I would probably start to move this towards an actual map, slap it on there and start to drag things around. Does anyone have a strong objection to that? Okay. Then I might need some Miro magic. Ah, sorry.
Very nice.
I just want to make number 6 bigger, and I'm so bad at Miro, it will take me a long time.
That is okay. Yeah, my usual thing here is either to make number 6 bigger or make all the stickies smaller.
That seems way more daunting, to make all of the stickies smaller. But if you could achieve that, I also would be. There's a reason why I use the VS Code plugin and not Miro, and you're seeing the reason right now.
Okay, so here's what I think we can do. If you'll be a little patient with me, I'm going to try to pull up a template and drop something in here. Let me see.
Oh, Emily Weber is here. She surely knows how to do cool stuff.
So I'm gonna put in a new copy of this template, I hope, and then steal
Make the
just
whole
the parts
thing
we
bigger.
want. Yeah, I think so. Wow. Is that big enough down below? I'm not sure if you can see.
Yes.
Yay, you might have to
No.
lock that down.
Oh yeah. Locked and loaded. Okay.
Metal.
Now let's see if I can move all the stickies down there. Oh, dang, Emily's so fast.
Go, Emily, go.
Oh yeah.
Now I've done it. If you temporarily unlock the map and then right click it and send it to back, I think that'll That'll fix us. Sorry, I forgot about the order of things. Booyah. That'll do it.
Did it do it? Where's our?
Oh, it looks like something happened where there we go. Command Z all the way. So yeah, let's make a copy. That's a good point, Andy. If we copy all those stickies and paste them again down below, then it'll just put it on top, I guess. Anyway, there we go. Teamwork.
I think it. I need this. Over here. Okay.
Yay, and thank you, Simon, for the assist.
We did it. Okay. Anyone have any strong opinions about where to start here? No strong opinions at all? Mhm.
I mean, I guess a first debate can be around the reach. I think that's what's happened in the environment, right? Recently, or in the last couple of years, is that this reach has become, at the very least, kind of product or almost commodity. It's at least a democratized in the sense that it's compared to, pre-social media, the reach, reach was limited to the person who could fund their own, newspaper or get access to newspapers or TV channels or whatever. And so reach has been, something that is now much more available. How to exactly represent that, I don't know, but that seems like a starting point for me for understanding the landscape.
Okay.
And that's maybe because social media has become a commodity, potentially. Social media and messaging platforms have become a commodity.
I want to call out a specific thing, not just social media, but there's automated affinity-based clustering that shows you what people like you engage with. Do we all know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
So like, this is not like very old. This is relatively recent that lots and lots of companies do this automated above the fold, below the fold editorial decisions. And like, it seems like it might amplify reach, or it might assort people who might not otherwise have met to meet.
Yeah, trying to make some sort of box for it here. I don't know where to place it exactly, but automation over here, automation, AI or automation driven content and connection pushing. How to frame it as something that you could, I don't know, you could argue that this is still what the social media platforms need to custom build, but the technology to do so, I mean, you could map the whole technical dependency landscape for social media platforms to exist, right? And that it is all more or less in the commodity or like product and commodity landscape today, which is why so many of these platforms exist, but they have to kind of custom build these algorithms, and they are a competitive advantage right now. So they should probably go somewhere on the left in the map, because that's kind of how these platforms have competed with each other, is to find different angles to how to do these connections and the content pushing. Are you using, Facebook was friend-based and then trying to be event or group or interest-based in a kind of second wave, and you have, the TikTok is, sort of the ultimate AI-driven, interest-based, search-based, but this is probably way out of scope for this map, but it certainly factors into why reach has become a sort of a commodity.
And Kat, I just noticed, I think Tiani might be able to join our panelists.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to, normally like in real life, okay, not at a conference, which is not real life, I would like, okay, everybody break for lunch and turn this into something that is more manageable, but instead we're just going to like do this on the fly here, people.
This is going great.
Yeah, it's
Tiani!
going. Hello, Tiani.
Hey there.
Welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay, so we went in a direction on reach, right? Anyone else want to continue to dive in on that one, or think we have this node here that we haven't covered yet? User engagement.
I'll just throw my hat into the ring on user engagement and suggest that if it's a practice, it appears to be a best practice, engagement at all costs. At least from, if you just look at how, I guess, the communication channels, the TikToks, the Instagrams, that's what I would put out there. I could be very wrong. The users must be engaged.
System. Well, maybe not push only. Because I'm thinking this idea that information is just pushed, like a push system, like versus pull. But I think it's creating pull somehow.
I think we get both, right? Like,
Yeah.
breaking news, notification, blah. But also like, wow, I haven't had a dopamine hit in a while. I'm going to open up my phone and pick from one of the apps, right? It's just.
Yeah, because they're created to do that. Yeah.
Like, again, I'll put a meta note out there, okay? How would Kat normally do this if you're going to map like Kat maps, which is not necessarily what you should hope in your life. But I would just go through this like as rapid fire and put stuff literally anywhere. Be like, oh, I have a very weak reason for plopping this over here. Oh, okay. And as I'm going through that process, maybe we like trim some things back. Like if you're watching the screen, I've been deleting things. We have another copy of it. Who cares? We can add it back in later. Like, in case you're not picking up on this fact already, I'm very loosey-goosey. No one's life is riding on this map. I'm gonna have fun with it and do things quickly and not get too invested in the thing, right? Part of it is that I don't want this to be like, oh, this map is my beautiful creation, and if it dies, I will surely die, right? So not treating it as precious.
Could I propose?
I don't care.
a weird thing.
Yes.
I have a trick for this that I found really works well when folks aren't like ready to like debate every little thing. But if I just want to hear what they think and to like get something out there, one of the things I do sometimes is I pick apart like, hey everybody, moral agendas. Like think about what a moral agenda is, hold it in your head. I'm gonna type it in chat, moral agenda. And I'm sure everybody's got like 10 different definitions of what a moral agenda is, and that's fine as far as I'm concerned. But when you think of moral agenda, think to yourself, do you think it's a stage 1 thing, a stage 2 thing, a stage 3 thing, or a stage 4 thing? And if you need to reference the cheat sheet down below or look at these like cheat sheets or the little characteristics in the map itself, okay, and now I'm going to count down, and when I count down to 0, I want everybody to type in the chat the stage number that they think it is. All right, you've had a chance to think, right? I'm going to go 3, 2, 1, boom, and then you're going to type it. Ready? 3, 2, 1, boom. Type the stage number 1, 2, 3, or 4. Look at this. Excellent. All sorts of opinions. We got a bunch of 2s and we got a 4. All right, and then sometimes what I'll do at this moment is I try to get people to fight. Sort of like what you were prompting to do earlier, Kat, is get people to fight a little bit. So Kat, I see you've got it in 4, and I see that a couple other people have it in 2. So John Nicholas, could I ask you to advocate for a 2?
Yeah, so moral agenda sounds, I wasn't here when the thing was created, and I don't know what the person who created it meant exactly, but sounds like something that experts debate about.
Really interesting. That's a reasoning that seems coherent to me, and I follow. Kat, could you advocate for stage 4?
Yes. So I think the idea of a moral agenda is so universally accepted that we automatically believe that every person that we encounter will have one, and it's part of how we exist in the world and anticipate what those people will do. If I heard that someone did not have a moral agenda, I would be like, oh, are you a sociopath?
I
So that would
completely
be
agree with
shock
that,
if
but
not used.
the text is not sufficient to distinguish between particular moral agendas and having a moral agenda of your own.
Yes,
My
I think
favorite part.
Ben intentionally picks topics like that where they're way too ambiguous and everyone has to, they feel like obligated to weigh in to like break the seal of participating in the discussion. Yes. So
I'm just so
Ben
happy
is the
moments
worst.
like that. Ha ha ha! All
Oh,
according to plan.
The practice of having a moral, as I'm reacting to some of the chat versus the map now. But the reason why that is interesting is because of practice. Then I think of, is there a practice? Is it a practice? Does it have is there a tool meaning? Is there a tool meaning and know-how to having a moral agenda, taking that from like a social practice theory angle?
Can you say what social practice theory is, Tiani, for anyone who might not be exposed to those ideas yet?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll try to. I mean, I'm still new learning. So it's basically, to summarize, there's a bunch of research and study around the idea, like defining like what is what is practice. Practices are things we can do individually, and sometimes they're done socially. And when they're done from the social angle, there's we each integrate knowledge differently into our, it's kind of like a complexity thing. Like we all have our own backgrounds, experiences, education, and know-how of how to do things at various levels and various ways. And we practice together. We have to like come to some kind of way of working together. And so we're integrating knowledge and kind of like working together to be able to do that. But ultimately, there's this idea that a practice has 3 elements, which are meaning, meaning or identity, I think, or purpose is kind of like some other words around that. Know-how, which is like, what does good look like? Like, what is this, like, what is there, how is that defined? And tools tool can be defined as a document, an actual software, a rubric, who knows what, I don't know, but it's a kind of tool. So it's the integration of those 3 things that make a practice. And so if one is missing, then you don't actually maybe have a practice. And so that's how I was analyzing this sentence of what is the practice of having a moral agenda. Like if I was to say, okay, I have a moral agenda, or I'm going to create one, or I'm going to create that with someone, like I can't pick something up to tell me how to do that. I don't think I can. Maybe there is, and that's the question I'm asking. Yeah.
I put in the chat a link to a slide deck about mashing up
Ooh.
social practice theory and board-lead mapping, and those
Nice.
folks, Chris McDermott and Mark Bergauer, would be my go-to in that arena if anyone is interested in that. Ben, thank you for the exercise. I feel like we are unstuck. Don't you think? Cool. Okay, we'll return to our graph that might be turning into a map. And again, what we're doing is kind of some rapid fire editing on here, right? So we'll put things in the stage of evolution. If you're new to mapping, you see the 4 stages along the bottom, and they correspond to these 4 stages, and you can look across like activities, data, practices, knowledge, and try to classify those. It's not an exact science, right? Like these 4 stages don't exist. We make them exist, right? And so like, not going to like perfectly fit into these buckets, and that's totally fine. The other thing that I have a feeling we might end up touching on is the idea of a pipeline for one of these things, so that we can account for the fact that different approaches or implementations are at different stages of evolution. Okay. Then anyone in the audience, I guess, yes, those of you in the audience, the participants, move stuff wherever you want. Once you have moved it to the stage where you think it belongs, please turn the sticky note green. Okay, or if the thing is in the stage where you think it belongs, then turn the sticky note green. If you think that something isn't relevant to our conversation right now, we have another copy, delete it. Okay, and then if someone feels very strongly, oh, no, that should definitely be in this round of the map, we can add it back. That's an okay thing to do. Okay, so I'm going to talk through the map and prompt people, but also you can go completely rogue and edit this in whatever way you see fit. Like, again, none of us are at work right now. This is just a cool thing that we're doing together in order to have this experience. So not a life or death situation. Follow your heart. Okay? Cool. All right. Yes, so move the stickies around, mark them green when you have moved them. Okay, so I was just going to keep working our way down reach. Obviously, lots of people have different ways of going through a map like this. You could go like follow a whole branch down, right? Or you could go across in a way that if people have them organized in that way. Okay, cool. Lots of things happening here. Looks like we are working on user management a little bit now. Things moving around under fear. No fear of change in this group, am I right? Oh, changing the map all over the place. I'm just gonna give everyone a few minutes to tinker with things, and hopefully we get to a point where a lot of stickies are green. Does anyone object to that course of action? Okay. While people are working on that, again, just to reiterate, if you would like to be promoted to panelist so that we can see your face and you can open your mic and speak, please raise your hand or post in the chat and I'll try to take care of that. Thanks, Andy.
What does green mean?
That we have
Someone has
placed
touched
it
it.
somewhere.
It's
Yeah.
but it's been placed. Oh, okay. That's what I thought. I just want to make sure it's
But also, if you disagree with the placement and it's already green, follow your heart.
Or have a fist fight.
over Zoom.
Sticky fight.
That's called escalation.
Yeah.
I'm
One of
very
my
good at it.
favorite things about Zoom is that, like, how physically dominating you are gets really, can be so easily manipulated, right? Like, there's this guy that I know that always puts his camera really low, and so people assume that he's like very tall. Not at all, but it's like the camera angle is like, whoa, looking up at this. And I put my, like, my desk is a mess, so I have my laptop up here and it's like looking down on me, and people assume that I'm very short and I'm not at all. Okay, it looks like less things are moving. Is that a fair thing to say? I noticed that there are still a fair number of things that are yellow, which
Oh.
means that no one has touched them. And no one marked them green to say, nope, I think this is where it belongs.
Yeah.
What would people do if I just deleted everything that's yellow?
I would personally probably sigh with relief, but that's just because I like deleting things.
This is what I would normally do, is threaten to delete or remove anything that hasn't been touched so far.
Yeah, can we talk through cards at this point?
Yes, I would love to do
Yes.
that.
So I have been staring at, for the longest time, people who lack strong sense of purpose or belonging and the few items connected there. And I don't know if it is necessary. I'm thinking about it. The reason being is I think that feels like a assumption. And maybe that assumption is that it just reminds me of the kind of the reasoning that's used for like youth that get into gangs in inner cities and wherever else there's gangs, that there's some other problems around belonging and purpose and all kinds of things that can make them feel, oh, I'm being welcomed into this group, even though it's not going to be good for them. And I think there's maybe an assumption that that's the same for radicalization of this other kind. Because I think it's probably some kind of, it's almost like being in a gang, maybe in a different, in a way, in a conceptual way. That's a needed condition to be radicalized, whether, from somebody who's a radicalizer who wants to radicalize other people and then has messaging and all kinds of motivations, is looking for someone. So that's a question, I think. Is that really? Because I think anyone, if they hear certain kinds of information enough times and in enough ways, could start to think about things differently. Even if they do have belong to certain groups and have purpose and maybe have social networks. I mean, and I say social networks, not in apps and things, but have a network, a social group, family, friends, all that stuff.
Let me rephrase what you just said.
Yeah.
What if we said that they need to be people who are not hearing a counter narrative from their network? So one of the ways that they would not hear a counter narrative is if they're connected to people, but those people are not generating a counter narrative. For example, maybe they're retired in Florida. My father is retired in Florida and has a network, but they're not particularly telling him not to believe what he sees on the news or something like that. They're not active. So it's possible that you can get to this by targeting someone who's isolated, but you don't necessarily have to target someone who's isolated if they're part of a network and it's kind of a passive, not generating counter narratives network.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. It's this idea. If you are not able to or do not intentionally widen out in your association and generally widen out and hear and see all kinds of things, you typically might have a more balanced or flexible, or even if you do have your own way of thinking things, you're not swayed from one direction. You allow people that space to feel how they feel, and because I saw that there's less rigidity of thinking and that kind of thing. So I think that's a great way of describing it. So that could be something we could I'm trying to think how to tweak this a little bit because I like that idea. If anyone else has, like to hear anyone else's ideas too.
I'll make a meta note here. When I am facilitating some mapping, for me, signs that we might need to have a discussion about any of the items on the map, the components on the map, would be when someone writes a lack of whatever, or we don't have this. We have that several places. We have fear, lack sense of purpose, lack social inclusion. And then there was one other one that I probably deleted that was about lacking regulation. So my preference is always to say a thing rather than the lack of a thing. Because I find that frequently builds in an assumption. And I use dehydration as an example, right? If you're out in the desert, I live in the desert, I live in Phoenix, and you're isolated and dying of thirst, and you say, someone comes along and you say, oh, I don't have any water. And they're like, oh, neither do I, as they're drinking a tall soda or something, and they just keep walking, right? Your problem isn't your lack of water, it's your dehydration. And there are lots of things that could hydrate you that are not specifically water. So I would normally highlight all the things that they lack. Another thing that I would do is to like just make some sort of note on the things that we're not sure about. Like, we're not sure on the wording of this. We're not sure if it should sit one place versus another place. So I'll just turn it a different color so that we can say like, hey, if this map gets to a point where it's not making sense, or we're at this really difficult part where it feels like we're laboring really hard and not getting anywhere with the map, then maybe we go back to those places that we weren't sure about to begin with and get most curious about them. So that's what I would normally do. And you're on cast mapping journey. So yeah. Kevin, I welcome you as a panelist.
Yeah, no, I was going to add, it's interesting. I think radicalization is more like a search activity. What you're doing is you're looking for almost what that pink post-it captures, which is a moment of indecision or crisis or whatever. But it allows you to win a small argument that becomes a much bigger argument. And because of the hermetically sealed nature of radicalization, because you are then cut off from all the other influences that would change the argument within the bubble. That's typically how it proceeds, and how I've seen it proceed in Ireland when people get recruited to terrorist organizations. It isn't the first step is usually not profound. It's usually minuscule, but it's the start rather than that. So I think radicalization is, and in a sense, this is why social media has been so effective at it, because it's able to bombard individuals with, literally just random stuff that eventually, somehow or another lands. And then you're relying on the human stuff. Well, I made that decision, so this decision must be right as a consequence, unless they hear an argument that takes them out of that. And I don't think I would suggest you haven't quite captured that. It's getting very close. But search is a commodity activity.
There's some potentiating things that you mentioned. One of them is the commitment to opposition that you might say is the fallacy of the fallacy of dualism, or false duality, right? Something about if you're not with us, you're against us. If this story is okay, if this story is against the other side, then we accept it, as opposed to sort of
I think that's actually afterwards. I think that's the act of justification, self-justification, right? And that is typically how, as humans, we do that. The us versus them, the tribalism, right? It's a deeply ingrained. Well, actually, there's a question there whether it is as deeply ingrained as people would maintain it is. But
there's some beliefs that are particularly helpful for the people who are partially radicalized to they gain additional flexibility to add on new convenient parts to their theory if they have things like there is no objective truth, or the mainstream is unanimously against us. Those are helpful for explaining all kinds of things, and so they sort of sneak in and cause someone who's already a conspiracy theorist to become a conspiracy theorist about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, but I suppose what I'm trying to actually say is that all of the things you got there are right, but I think I would characterize for a radicalizer, mapping him, I would say his first step is actually search. What he's trying to do is look for moments or people who have where there's an opportunity to win a small argument, and it's typically a very small argument.
Are you imagining that this is a one-to-one approach?
No.
Because I sort of suspect that a whole lot of people are generating content that is amusing to them, amusing to the people that are already engaged in the mythology, and also acting to bring in new people and radicalize them. So like that activity of generating content is broadcast. It's not
Yes.
trying to find people and approach them one-to-one.
No, but I'm not assuming.
What happens if we just put all the things on here, right? Because it sounds like right now we're trying really hard to do the converge, and as everyone knows, that's my least favorite part. So I think we could put on here, in order to have someone to radicalize, the radicalizer needs to have some ability to search or identify people that I think there's two things there, right? Like, is it worth it to radicalize them, right? Is there a payoff here? Because we know, like Obama's campaign, right, didn't target everyone. They identified people that were worth targeting, right? And then, because we don't have unlimited funds, we're not like serving every single person with their own. So is it worth it? And then,
but actually, Obama's a really good example, right? You know.
Yes, that's why I used him.
It's the same exact. I would argue it's exactly the same mechanism, because they
the same mechanism, literally.
And it is a mechanism because it's not one-to-one. You're winning a small argument with somebody out there by pumping out 1,000 different viewpoints. Nobody gets to read them all, and you win. You win 0.1%. That's 10 people, right? And then they start to engage, and then I think all the rest of the stuff happens. But initially, I think radicalizing, if you look at it, the thing you're going to exploit is the long tail that the internet gives you, the reach that you never had before.
Okay. All right, so reminder, right now we're in a rapid fire phase, right? So feel free to suggest someone so we need to dive in deeper on, but in large part, we are just in rapid fire mode. And folks can feel free to clean this up in whatever ways you want. Are there other sticky notes that people feel we need to talk about? This one, my question is, what would happen if we just deleted it and put everything that is connected to someone to radicalize? As I look at the map, I'm not sure a lot of things would change. So these kind of, right, this is part of why we're mapping, because we might be saying like, oh, this is this composite of all of these different things. But then when we look at the map, like if everything is just going through this same path, then maybe there are some interesting things about how we are thinking of the world. So someone to radicalize, or people who lack strong sense of purpose or belonging, where would we put that in terms of evolution? Anyone have a strong reaction?
I've been here getting pizza, so I'm off camera. But what comes to mind with that is I always just feel really uncomfortable putting people like as if they're objects on the map, as if they are the thing to be commoditized from left to right. And so the question that always comes up for me is, what is the work, like the activity or the practices or what have you surrounding coming to have a pool of people like this. So I just wanted to point that out. Like what is the work that happens to or is at play to produce radicalizable people? I guess that's a question. Is that the thing that we're placing, or is it
We kind
stocks
of
of people?
had that discussion while you were getting pizza,
Oh,
Ben,
I'm sorry.
but no, that's totally fine. So I think your question is what makes these people that are radicalizable? Yes? Is that the question?
I think if we're positioning it, what is it? And is it people? Or is it the, I guess the practices of building pools of those people, for example? It always gets really messy in my brain trying to tell the difference, and I think John Nicholas is going to help me out.
I don't know. I'm recalling that generating leads is something that sometimes people put on maps. Like, is the radicalizer generating leads by search?
Yes, for me, it seems like there's a lot of churn over here, right? So that would kind of tell me is that there's some sort of breakdown here. And my suspicion, based on our discussion and lots of maps made before, but feel free to tell me I'm wrong, is that we've gone too general, and it's causing us to consider everything, all the different ways in which this card could be true, versus let's pick one of those ways in which it could be true and get unstuck on our map. And I'm not saying that's always the right thing to do, but that is what I would normally do in this situation. So instead of saying like, we're looking for people to buy magical toothpaste that cures your COVID, that was a real thing at the beginning of the pandemic, if you don't know. And it was kind of what I would consider a radical organization trying to make money that way. So like buying something, that is one thing. We need people who could be radicalized into buying. We need voters. So what this tells me right now, the shape of our discussion, is that these are not specific enough for us to think through the rest of the value chain.
Actually, you see, what struck me when I looked at this, because I did come late to this, was, I suppose the observation about search, but really what it is, it's moving back, left and right quite aggressively, right? Because a lot is happening in the sort of genesis, non-commoditized area, and then it keeps switching backwards and forwards. And I think that's one of the problems with this particular topic, is that it's going to do that. It goes from the very general to the very specific, back to the very general, as it goes from sort of visible and also invisible.
I think earlier someone said like, oh, well, radicalization has always existed. Why are, there's nothing new about this. For me, part of what I ask myself is, why is this a thing that I'm wanting to map right now, right? And that is that point about that degradation, I guess, is why I would want to map this right now, right? Because so surveillance capitalism was only established as a business model in the early 2000s, and it's already now completely saturated the globe, gotten itself like intertwined with societal infrastructure, like internet access and access to electricity and things like that. So there's been rapid evolution of some of these capabilities, and part of what I am interested in is, where do we have mismatches in terms of evolution, where some things have evolved very quickly. Like, I think whoever put the lack of regulation there, that might be alluding to the fact that we've had some parts of this ecosystem evolve rapidly to the point where they have become not conspicuous at all. They fade into the background. We just take it for granted that there are social networks and there always will be, and all of those things. And the regulation has not managed to keep up at the same rate of evolution. And there's probably lots of different reasons, but I'm very interested in the mismatches in evolution. And yes, Richard points out it would be interesting to see the evolution of this map from classical history to the modern day. And that's something that I like to do very much. Like, sometimes I will create a map, like, what would this map look like before the internet? Okay, draw that map. Okay, what does this map look like today? And then I know that Simon Wardley will probably pop up as soon as I say this and be like, Kat, no, you're demoted. No more session for you. But sometimes I like to make a silly map of the future, right? Or possible futures, assuming lots of weird things. Yes.
Something striking me from this, I like the thing that's kind of like teased out in a couple categories in my brain as I'm hearing you talk, and some of what you were saying, Kevin, is that we could talk about radicalization in general through the use of the tools that are available. Like you kind of just ended with, like, pre-internet, with the internet, or you could just say, like, currently, right now, how might this be done? But then if we were to get less general to see what is happening, it might make sense then to say, I'm a radicalizer who wants to get votes. I'm a radicalizer, like someone I think I saw in the chat, or I'm trying to sell something. I'm trying to sell this specific thing. And then still all those same tools and all those same channels will apply, but it will be like in just like a narrower context. And that might be an interesting way to see if that kind of like we're able to zoom in a better way. So that's something that's kind of popping for me, is this like, and I think there is like something on the map where there's like different motivations. There's, actually, no, it disappeared. It got edited, it got deleted. But it was, was about like, it was like political. Oh, you know, maybe there's like a commercial agenda. There it is, moral agenda. So the different agendas, there might be some different flavors of something in there that's interesting to see. That's just, anyway, I'm just reacting to what I'm hearing, and that's kind of what's popping up for me as a way to get narrower, if that's what we wanted to do.
There's a phenomenon that the targeted ads industry has actively developed an ecosystem of exchanging basically rumors about not exactly a person, but like an IP address or a browser fingerprint, something like that, which can, because they're aggregating from a whole lot of different sites, actually add up to knowing what kind of person this is pretty directly, like their gender and other demographic data within some range.
I made a change on the map. I put, instead of wanting someone to radicalize, I put wants people to vote. And I suggest that we try that for a minute and see how it serves us, and see if we can get more specific. And if that gets us unstuck over here on this side of the map. But if you join late, the thing here is not to create a map. We are driving towards a set of interventions that we can leave this session today, and we can do something and see how it works out. Okay.
There's a thing that I've been chewing on for the last couple of minutes. I'm wondering what you think about it. to sort of like, it might actually be like a proposal to solve my complaint about people being on the map. And I think, what if a supply of people to radicalize is more the ability to spot someone who is receptive to your message? And I look at the relationships, if that depends on things like the social circles that they're in and who they identify with and all these other kinds of things, it seems to fit. And I like that you put voters there. I think that's like, who would vote for my positions? Where do they hang out? Who do they identify with? The relationships that are there start to make a lot of sense, I think.
Okay, let's roll with it then. See what happens. Now we've picked a specific use case. Yes. Feel free to move things. Let me make sure everyone has the access to the board. Okay. All right, so now we're rolling with the idea of getting both, driving a political agenda. So now we have the idea of voters, and those could be people. We have kind of the story of motivation that goes behind them. We have the idea we said before. These things, are they susceptible, and is it worth it for them, right? So you need voters who could potentially buy into whatever it is that you're selling, and that are worth it in order to convert them. Okay. Are there other things that we want to dig in on that were unclear, so that we can rapid fire? My idea would be to change some of these things to, are they ready and is it worth it?
What's a bit terrifying here is how easy the mapping, I mean, the congruence of both maps is a bit terrifying. And I wonder if, therefore, you know, if you think about radicalization versus voting, or, you know, well, is it just that the radicals are now using a different set of tools than heretofore?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, what I'm saying is because you know, it's been very easy to switch from radicalization to voting, right? There doesn't seem to be a huge change in the overall map. Yeah, some of the bits are moving around a little bit, but not tremendously. Is not the implication that falls out of that that all we've been observing with radicalization, and it goes to your point about, you know, being too little too late in terms of putting them down, is that they've caught up far faster than rules, regulations, laws, etc.
I think maybe this is a little bit less significant of a shift, because we went from a generic recipe of a thing to a specific instance of a thing. And so it's like applying a blueprint. It's like, oh yeah, if you look at voting just this way, I'm not sure if we can, like, maybe that makes some things click for you, and maybe I'm not totally like completely following, but I think maybe like the choice to switch to voters was not one of like asserting like it's the same, or like, I don't know.
No, I wasn't suggesting that. What I was suggesting was, I put it in pink up there, you know, wants to like my Instagram feed, and I'm not sure these maps are all that different, whatever you pick in terms of the instance, which means it's probably a very good map, but then why would we have considered radicalization different from an Instagram, liking an Instagram feed?
Could you express the combined sense as polarization that if there's factors that are creating it easy to radicalize, and those same factors are also creating it, it's easy to find or target voters for persuasion, then maybe those factors are causing polarization.
Yeah.
Yeah, I picked voting, right, out of all the specific examples that we could use. And it was because it fit with the things that were already on there. And I felt like we needed a specific example to get us unstuck from all the different things that are possible in the general. So that's why that fits. And yes, I think the thing that we're driving at overall is that there are underlying things about this system, right? And we're trying to find, like, what are the leverage points in this system where we can intervene that regardless of why people want other people to become radicalized, yes, we have this common set of tools and our system is disposed in a certain way. And so we want to know how to intervene. And I welcome Toby to the panel. I promoted you. Hello, Toby.
Nice to get a
yes.
promotion. It's also
Okay.
great because now I can be like, just like everybody else has probably been doing, but I'll say it out loud.
Yes.
All right. And if there's anyone new out there, I just posted the board link. And if you would like to get promoted to the panel, you just need to raise your hand. People are coming and going. And again, the intent that we're driving at here is that those of us that choose to can leave this session and understand something that each one of us could do to try to intervene in this system. So it is not a purely philosophical exercise. Okay.
Are you hoping to intervene
sounds
in order
amazing,
to do
but-
more? Are you hoping to intervene
more
in order to be more effective radicalizers? Or is radicalization necessarily problematic?
I am choosing to make the distinction between being radicalized, where your world gets smaller, and being going through a different sort of shift, which up until recently, the literature would call waking up, but apparently that is a politically charged phrase anymore. So I don't know what you would use to say having an experience where, yes, maybe you have gone farther in a certain direction, but your world has gotten bigger instead of smaller. So for me, the scope of the world in which you exist is part of the definition.
That's helpful. So yeah, so if we start from the position of radicalizer, like from the position of the type of radicalization that makes your world smaller and more hyper focused, I suppose, as opposed to one where it becomes more expansive and more have more access to more. It's like it's actually sort of the exact opposite of the session that JD and Vikesh and I just finished, where in order to disrupt kind of current trends, you'd need to become more aware of more perspectives and more, not just perspectives of humans, but even like the perspective of trees that literally that panic when there's clear cutting, right? This form is a way to intensify concentration of power and intensification, concentrations of power, wealth, etc., for the benefit of a few instead of the benefit of many.
Yes.
Not sure if there's a question or a comment.
Well, your voice went up at the end, so I assume it's a question, or you're a millennial, or both, which I know to be true about you, Toby. Okay, let's see. Some people, okay. All right, see you, Kevin, thank you. Let's
Thanks,
see.
Kevin.
So this is super neat / interesting. I like the question of intervention, because that's kind of one of the places where we got a little bit stuck. Like once you kind of figure out what the landscape is, things kind of look terrible. And so how do you find the levers that, I mean, maybe it is as like, I'm not sure, maybe it can be simplified down to how do you open instead of close? And can you use the same techniques to open that are currently being used to close?
Yes, I am wondering about that as well. I have wondered that. I want to welcome Simon and Eric to the panel, and hopefully the Miro board, if the link is there and working. Okay.
I'm in
Cool.
there.
Right on.
It's-
So
it's-
yes, welcome
it's all-
to the mapping.
Thank you very much. And yeah, it's really good actually sort of jumping into a pre-configured map there, and being able to sort of read through it. And me sort of throwing out that sort of clickbait a little bit in terms of law enforcement perspective. The lack of inclusion in terms of the Genesis stage bit, that's particularly interesting, because certainly from law enforcement we see this quite a lot, both in online and in the physical world. There's a phenomenon called cuckooing, if people are familiar with it, where basically you take somebody with learning disabilities and you take over their property so that you can use it to sell drugs. It's quite a big thing around student campuses, or at any other kind of place that you want to sort of get into to propagate sort of some illegal activity. But equally, it's true for finding people sort of who are on the autistic spectrum as well, who have some really excellent skills, but less of a filter in terms of exploitation. So consequently, they're sort of targeted by criminality as well to do their dirty work a lot of times. So again, when you're talking about the radicalization piece, you can create this kind of cyber army of people that with fairly sophisticated, massively sophisticated kind of social engineering techniques can put a whole bunch of people in the firing line and protect themselves from actual prosecution. I don't know if that's helpful to this wider piece, because actually with respect to the respect to the key thesis, whether it's terrorism or financial interest, the model is exactly the same. It's just the purpose you're doing it for, financial goal or political change. Actually, the steps involved are completely in common. You're just exploiting people to your own ends.
Yeah, I think
Seem
that
like
goes to
it's-
the are they ready piece, right? Like, do we know what a good target is? And someone earlier said, oh, well, you don't have to identify, you can just cast this wide net, but we know that's actually not what happens, right? So yes, like through digital places, you can cast a wide net, but then individual people are targeted more than others, right? And apparently that's also true in the world that you come from, Simon, with policing. And I did paste a link into the chat about this technique, because it seems like that is, right? That is what we're seeing. So this feels like potentially one place where we could intervene by learning more about what makes someone a good target or not, and doing some thinking there. Eric, welcome.
Thank you. Sorry about the Zoom issues. Something, and it might go right in the middle here, but I'm not sure how to map it. is this whole discussion doesn't talk about the presence or the accessibility of the other. And most radicalizers, at least in the negative sense, tend to have a negative stereotype you're building against. You're picking something to be the bad guy so that you can radicalize or mobilize somebody. And I'm wondering if there's interventions that are around humanizing the other, things like that, that don't show up on the map because we don't have the other as a concept.
Yeah, I was wondering about that as well. Where would you put other?
I'm sure it's connected to the, is it worth it? It might be connected to the driver motivation. It's somewhere in there, but I wasn't quite sure how to represent it.
So I was thinking,
In which stage of evolution would you put it?
Honestly, I think it depends on the others. Some others are long-term. I mean, think about anti-immigration or something like that. That has a history that goes back over 100 years. And then there's other ones like the mobilizing against the rise of the internet companies that are relatively new, and we're still figuring that out.
We picked voting as the specific context that we're looking at. Does that change your answer at all?
At least in US politics, I would say different parties have, I would say one party tends to go after more commodity things, and another party tends to have a little newer and even custom.
One thing I would add, and I can certainly talk to the voting piece, because again, it's really just about getting your outcome. So in terms of the voter outcome, the same proxy is valuable in terms of identifying stakeholder cohorts. You want to target a young person from a southeastern region of the UK, and you want to connect to his peer group. So me as a sort of middle-aged white man isn't going to communicate to that. So I need a proxy to push through. So actually I'm exploiting that to get that legitimacy and influencing that decision, and use that person as a mouthpiece. But certainly I can't remember the last map camp we did in person. And one of the call outs I did then was actually looking for a tool to do this, because I did a session earlier where I talked to local authority or councils, it's easy, to make it simpler, police and health, looking at the same problem from their respective perspectives. So the shout out that I did a few years back was actually, we need a tool that's not so two-dimensional, because part of this is actually seeing the 3D of a person in terms of that same individual being interacted with by this different agency looks like something different, but they're a whole person, they've got dimensions. So you often find something that has been exploited, whether to pervert their thinking, to thinking this extreme right wing or extreme left wing ideology is actually good for them, or whether they're just being manipulated. That person, what went into that, and actually understanding the wider context of that is important, because we often get young people that are perpetrators of crimes that are also that were first victims of crimes, and particularly, and again, forgive me, once you're talking to people in law enforcement, it gets very dark very quickly. When you talk about child sex exploitation, a routine practice is the minute that you have exploited one child, you get that child to exploit another. So literally that victim becomes the offender. They're not in the truest form an offender, but actually they're breaking the law and they are causing an offence to another person. But again, that actually immunizes the criminal even more, because now that child, because they've been completely exploited, now is in fear of the fact that they've broken the law as well. So and I think that sort of that wider context goes to the in terms of wanting to vote. Once you've gone out with forgive me if I point to America, with a Trump hat on in terms of making great America, and you're filmed on Fox saying rah rah rah, let's storm the Capitol, it's quite difficult to roll back from that position, actually, I would imagine. And that sort of that sunk cost fallacy piece, it's quite hard to do a flip flop of your opinion, even though it might be a very sophisticated technique to actually get you to come out with some dribble, because of the way you were targeted and exploited, right? Did that make sense, by the way? Sorry.
I think it made perfect sense, and I think it points to the fact that we very likely, you know, if this was something that we were an established group, and maybe we will become one, high five, working on this together, probably points to the fact that we would have math from each of those different perspectives to better take people as whole people. Yeah.
One other point I would say, and part of the reason why I broke down the challenge in my talk to these different perspectives, is about sharing the load, because there are completely legitimate and commercially interested parties that would want to identify these people for the right reasons. And if you can link those to how you protect them from people would exploit them, then actually you kind of get the funding plus the result that you're looking for anyway. Ultimately, you want to reduce harm. But equally, if you I was talking to this again earlier in terms of quid pro quo, if you can get private industry to see that there's profit or advantage to be had out of helping us solve this societal problem, that's a great win-win. If you can do that, then actually you can leverage that those stakeholders and that funding to get that done. Because certainly, I mean, I've talked to autism in particular, but you know, NSA, NASA, and various other organizations want people that are on the spectrum because they can be so singularly focused. You know, so the endeavor that they would do to try and filter out the population to those extreme people is exactly the same. You know, from a mapping perspective, what you do to get there would be exactly the same thing what you do to protect them from other people exploiting them anyway.
Yeah, there's this guy in the US that I like a lot, and his name is Jackson Katz, and he talks about that the same people that have the potential for really negative impact have the potential for really far-reaching positive impact. And so maybe instead of trying to prevent the negative impact, we lean in and say, like, acknowledge you have, for some reason, this power in your network, in your social circles, or in these specific social circles, the way that you show up in these places. And so we want you to acknowledge that power and use it, acknowledging the disproportionate impact that it'll have. So like, he provides training to whatever, high school football stars, and like, you know, people that are rising quickly through the ranks in the armed services or things like that, right? Where you could have a disproportionate impact and it could go either way. And I like that approach because it acknowledges that we make choices, right? And just trusting people that if they have information about their role in the system, then maybe they'll make this choice, maybe they'll make another choice. We don't know.
I mean, I can give you a very clear example of this. So, you know, I was talking about mental health, particularly as it pertains to suicide. You know, every successful suicide is 5 to 1. Attempted suicides, and every successful suicide costs the economy 1.67 million. So 6,000 suicides, 10 billion cost. But actually, when you start to dig underneath that, it's the point is that's the negative externality of mental health, which a lot of people won't get to the level of suicide, thankfully. But actually, focusing in on that and the use case around that talks to a much wider problem that is, again, you can identify the organizations that have a problem with that. And certainly in government or any organization or any part of an organization that talks to the money, there's much more focus on vetting and security. Right, and certainly in military or police or all that kind of stuff. So vetting's a massive overhead, and it's really in the Stone Age. It's basically you check people right at the beginning of their career, and then you go, oh, they're fine, and you let them in. But it's not very live. At some extreme super high levels, yes, it is, but not for most. But actually, what makes you vulnerable to exploitation, targeted exploitation, just as in with spear phishing or just general phishing, is actually that weakness, you know, that affair, that relationship breakdown, that drinking problem, that wider piece, which is typically, again, a self-medication around some other part in their life that's not happy. But that's the weakness. That's the weakness that people are looking to exploit. So if you if you can identify that actually to keep your information secure.
I think that's a solution. Something like mental health supports is a solution that might address this purported weakness. Another angle would be, for example, male entitlement. If you have a outsized expectation of what you're entitled to, then you feel resentment, even though you are not being harmed by the system. So creating that sense of entitlement and then exploiting that sense of entitlement can convert someone who is not, without purpose or underserved by mental health things, if they are not immune to the male entitlement or white supremacy or whatever. The story of outside entitlement, I don't want to counter-propose a solution. I'm just trying to point out that the narrative that you're proposing sounds like a particular intervention.
I think it's fine for us to go to interventions now because we are short on time. So I started putting some sticky notes on there of things. I put this one down here. So we have at several points during the conversation alluded to the fact that not everyone is equal in this, right? Like more dominoes fall around some people than others. And so something that I don't know, maybe you think it's stupid and that's fine, but I have been wondering, do the influential people in my network know that they have that influence? And if they do or don't, should I make an observation on that? I think that is something that I could do. And I am actually thinking of one person right now who pretty consistently is always like, oh, I say whatever because who cares? And yet they have a huge influence. So even just maybe acknowledging that out loud.
I have to assume you're talking about me.
Obviously, I'm talking about you. Ben, do you have 15 minutes after the conclusion of this workshop? I need to talk to you.
I'm so glad that we get to talk about interventions. I've waited so long, Kat. I wanted to intervene the whole time. But I'm excited to look at this too, because one of the things I think about when I look at a value chain and I look at a Wardley map is it's both positive in the sense that like this is how the thing works, like at least it's our model of how the thing works. It's also kind of a model of how things could be taken apart or sabotaged or undermined. And when I hear you describe this particular intervention, like informing people of their power, that's attaching like a constraint. It's actually diminishing one of the functions on the map and making it function differently or less, or it's interesting. It's holding the system back by almost like if you're sitting on a three-legged stool and someone came along and kicked out one of the legs, like you'd be a lot more uncertain. That system would function a lot less usefully for allowing you to have a place to sit. And I think a value chain works very similarly with the lower level dependencies propping up the higher ones. So I just wanted to make the observation. It's almost like every place in the map is a potential place for intervention.
One thing if I could just add and very much picking up on John's point earlier about sort of male entitlement. I think you're right, but I think we would broaden that out in terms of just a sense of injustice, whether it's male entitlement, female justice, educational entitlement, tenure entitlement. I've been here longer. I went to this university. I'm from the southeast. Whatever. You feel an injustice has been applied to you. I think where that fits into this wider piece is actually that whole context of actually the negative influence that social media has is in identifying this, saying, oh, by the way, did you know this thing? If you experience this, you should feel this is injustice. And like, up until this point, I didn't realize that was a problem, but now I'm really upset about it. And actually that whole that marginal impact, that 1% influence that social media is having on society, that basically says I am more unique and less us, and therefore I've got more reasons to be upset, which is because we've got big brains kind of screwing with our brains that's making us less happy, and actually is making us easier to prod and direct in the directions they want us to go to. So absolutely take your point, but I wouldn't isolate it just male entitlement. I would just say anything that's ultimately resulting in a stressor that is causing you to create a gap in your armor of a whole kind of rational human being that can actually, because that's the point. Once you've hit a low, once you've got that vulnerability, if you've got people kind of sort of sticking the knife in further, then it may that's where you get a cascade, and that's when you get some real problems.
I know.
Yeah, I've often wondered what would change about social networks if on every post it said how many people saw this and did absolutely nothing, right? Because it's set up to just show you the people that engaged with it, the people that liked it, the people that replied, the people, you're like, oh, all the people in this discussion have a strong feeling about it. Right, but there are millions of people who saw it and moved on with their lives. And in the physical world, we see that, right? Like there's one person causing a ruckus and you see on the street, there are a shitload of people just looking the other way because this jackass is doing something that we would really prefer to ignore.
And it's not just the views, but it's also all the other people who are in the area who just didn't even look over. Right? Like views can even be like, haha, people have seen me. You're like, these people could have seen you and didn't.
What would your view of the physical world be, right? If you like only were filtered to like, oh, as I look at this now, I can only see the people that are engaging with this situation. Like that'd be fucking bonkers, right? But that is social media, that we don't see all the people that just got on with their lives, or the people that are sitting there spectating and just being like, look at this is stupid, right? There is none of that. You only see the people that are like, this is very important and I'm gonna stay in this thread until I die. Like, that's it.
So I dropped a couple of things on the left, like because we were talking about interventions and levers. So just to the left of the map, like it feels like I'm not sure how it fits yet, but it feels like both kind of the mechanics of behavioral change would be levers that you could apply in the different nodes of the map. And that has everything to do from like the person who has all the time in the world to sit on the thread until they die is like somebody who doesn't have like has more ability to influence and to impact, potentially. Depends on how obnoxious they are.
The way things are set up today, it is that, right? It's like you just simply by being there. Yeah,
it's like, I don't know, like I was thinking about it like parent teacher conferences. Like if the only times they're available are during like 9 to 5, then suddenly any parent who can't get that time off like has no voice, right? And so the similar thing, like in terms of like the radicalizer who's trying to like get people to vote in a certain way, they need to have like one of the pieces that they need is the components about like opportunity to interact with people and the capability of doing it, as well as whatever they're in. Like, I know that we already have motivation here, like what's the driver, but like the other piece is about like how good are they at it, and where do they, like, how can they, like, do they have the opportunity to find those people? It can be similar, it can be mirrored in the same way. Like, what opportunities do we have that those people don't have? Like, I don't know, I sent on a Zoom link this morning because my aunt died, and half my family was like, what's a Zoom link? Right? I'm like, I don't know how you don't know what a Zoom link is 3 years into a pandemic, but it's because they don't work online, right? And so like finding, like, there are these other places where de-radicalization can happen, even if, or opposite radical, the positive version. We didn't find the good word for it, but the positive, like for every place that there's online, there are people engaging online, there might be other places to interrupt that content.
One of the things I would add that concerns me greatly is everything that we've seen so far in terms of, you know, the Cambridge Analytica or any of the wider sort of exploitations of data is nothing compared to what we're on the brink of. And again, forgive me talking about child exploitation, it's something I've done a lot of mapping around, is the force multiplier effect of technology in this space. So ultimately, you used to get a one-to-one kind of exploiter to exploited. We put a guy away last year that was exploiting 5,000 kids, right? And that was using some really rudimentary technology, but it was massive force multiplier. When you look at GPT-3 and variations of the theme, the fact is, rather than just sending out some Facebook messaging based on some fairly crude, albeit multi-dimensional kind of profiles, you can actually have individual narratives. I can stalk, yeah, I have the potential to stalk the hell out of somebody through using a range of bots and driving them towards suicide based on, you know, what you're saying, Kat. You know, might have millions of interactions, but ultimately, who's actually talking to you, DMing you all day long? Well, a bot doesn't care. And yeah, those technologies are really powerful and really scary. And yeah, sorry, I won't end up in dark space.
No,
but absolutely, we need to discuss this.
Yeah, Yulia, one of the speakers at Map Camp today, she wrote the paper, I don't know, years ago now, but you know, people imagine that there are these bot armies, like huge bot networks, and that's what tips us over. And she was like, no, you can have like 10 bots that can completely shift a whole narrative about something by just replying to a bunch of people with like a tiny little one-up or whatever they had just posted based on some extremely naive sentiment analysis, and suddenly it like triggered this chain of escalation in no time and with no effort. You don't actually need a bot army, you need a couple prolific bots, and that's pretty much it.
Is that the didding on the bottom left of the map?
Yeah. Yes, people have this natural tendency to be like, I caught a fish this big, and the next person says, well, I caught a fish this big, and the next person, I caught a fish this big, right? Like, yeah, that's a natural thing, and social networks exploit that, right? You post something, and then
the whiny person saying like, I never catch a fish this big.
Right. I've never caught a fish in my whole life. I'm going to go hang out with other people that are not going to catch fish because we never actually go fishing, but it's still unfair. Yes. I need, selfishly, like I need time to prepare for the fireside chat, and we're just at the end, coming to the end of our window. This is my plan, everybody. I'm so thankful for everyone that showed up. My plan, anyone, this board will remain open, do whatever you want with it. I trust you. I will write up some of the things, and I will make sure that I send out a PDF and an Excel export of this board. and then I'll write up some of the things. I thank you all for live mapping. And I don't know, what else should I be saying? Ben?
I just want to say thanks for doing this, Kat. This was really fun to just have a bunch of people hanging out, mapping, coming in and out. It was great. Thank you.
Yeah, I was super happy to see this. I was like, oh, this is my favorite kind.
Cool. Right on. Well, thanks everybody. I guess I'm gonna stop sharing. Come on.
Take care. Thanks.
Thank you all so much. Let's see.